I grew up when nerd culture was not a cool thing. I bought X-Men #1 for $12, and that was a lot of money that I saved for my newspaper route. So I wanted to show how culture changed, starting from like 2000 to kind of bring us up present and show it wasn't cool when it first started, how it's changed. Maybe we shouldn't be so divided by design in that sequence where I show a bunch of YouTubers. They're all over the political spectrum on purpose because we should be able to talk to each other. We should be able to have discussions. We should be able to, I believe when I say we, not just we as nerds, we as Americans, we as citizens of the planet Earth, we should be able to solve any problem. But if we can't solve the problem of talking to each other respectfully on the internet, we will solve no problems.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. Today, I have a very special guest with me. He's a film fanatic, a magazine mogul, a problematic person, or so I'm told, a turbo nerd, a TV star, and a documentarian. He's the founder of Film Threat, my favorite indie magazine on independent film, the former face of G4TV, and the director of Attack of the Dog, a film that reveals the behind-the-scenes story of the original iteration of Attack of the Show, which was mega popular when I was in high school and college years, and big influence on me. It's a show that, for a lot of us, defined a generation of nerds. He's none other than the legendary Chris Gore. Chris, thank you so much for coming on CultureScape.
Well, wow, Peter, wow. I'm kind of flummoxed here by your introduction. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's really kind.
Yeah, no, I put you a little bit on the spot. It's like a fan comes up and is like, "You saved my life." I was like, I was gonna end it all, and then I saw your thing, and you're like, "Oh, what do you even say to that?"
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Obviously, you know my work. So there you go. That's awesome.
Yes. I was, Chris, you're a big influence on a lot of people like me because, we can start here. One of the things I love about your work, Chris, and even at your time of Attack of the Show, which is, of course, the focus of your new documentary, which you can see all over the place. I watched on YouTube. Is that you not only did Attack of the Show define an era of nerddom where it's becoming more popular, it also defined an era of how nerds interacted. This is kind of why we did the podcast. It's why I do the nerd stuff I do is I remember being a nerd and going to an anime convention or comic thing or having D&D night, and anyone could show up and we'd be buddies and friends. And that was it. Nothing about politics, nothing about religion. Any of that did not matter. Sometimes maybe it did come up, but people just kind of like brushed it off, because it was like, we're here to talk about Star Trek, dude. We don't want to hear about Ron Paul and the flat tax today. So that is the era I love the most. It's kind of why I always hope we can get back to. And your documentary, even your work in general, is just so emblematic of that. So I have mad respect for what you do, Chris.
Well, the nerd tent, as you pointed out, it's a big tent, and it includes everybody. There's a lot of buzzwords that people like to use, inclusion, diversity, whatnot. The nerd space has always been diverse from where I've sat. I've always seen all different types of people. The one thing I think that's different that I've seen is because I've been going to San Diego Comic-Con since the 90s, early 90s. I think 89 was the first time I kind of went there for a day. Then I realized, San Diego Comic-Con's a big deal. There weren't as many women in the space. And if you saw a woman at San Diego Comic-Con, it was like a Bigfoot sighting. Very rare. But I would say that now it is fully 50-50. You go to any nerd event, WonderCon, San Diego Comic-Con, Dragon Con, it's 50-50 men and women. I think that started in the early 2000s, and that's a great thing because, my daughter brags that she's been going to San Diego Comic-Con since she was a fetus, which is actually true. So she's a grown woman now, and we go to Comic-Con and nerd events together, LA Comic-Con. And yeah, so that's the biggest change, but it's always been a space where you are welcome if you love something. We don't have to like the same things. Maybe you like Doctor Who of a certain era. I like Battlestar Galactica 1980. I could go on and on. Maybe you think Krull is one of the coolest movies you've ever seen, which would be true. One day I hope to own a glaive. But the nerd space, and this was part of my not so secret agenda with making this documentary, was to remind people of a time when nerd culture was more united. I always expect politics to be divided. I've always been like middle of the road when it comes to politics, like whatever, you like this guy, you like this person, I'm going to vote this way, but there, God, it's over. Thank God that election's over. Let's just whatever. Politics has always been divided, I believe, in some form. It's never been as caustic and where people are being vilified, or each side is kind of vilifying an aspect of the other. That's new. I've never seen nerd culture get weirdly divided because I don't care. Like, I did not like The Force Awakens. I thought it was not a great way for Han Solo to go out. I loved The Last Jedi because it got me interested. Like, oh, maybe they know what they're doing. They're going to stick the landing. It's going to be this triumph. I'm going to reunite Han, Luke, and Leia. We know what happened, but
Interesting.
all I'm saying is I wasn't upset with people who disliked The Last Jedi. Like, I get why they disliked it. Like, it was like they wanted Luke to come in and be a badass and take down a Star Destroyer just using the Force, or crazy shit like that we'd never seen in a Star Wars film. And I didn't mind. In fact, I did a panel at San Diego Comic-Con in 2018 called The Last Jedi Debate, where I had people on two sides, because I wanted to bring them together to talk. I was tired of seeing people attacked for their opinion about a Star Wars movie. I mean, come on. So seeing this, it really concerned me, because back to doing G4TV, that was like this golden era of we are united because we love different things. Maybe I love this a little more. Christian Bale's my Batman. Maybe Michael Keaton's your Batman. So what? They're both, I love them. They're Batman. They are Batman. But that was partially what I was trying to show by making the film an archival documentary, which is a specific subgenre of doc. And an archival documentary is when you only use footage from that time, right? Originally, the plan for Attack of the Doc was to make, to interview everybody, right? And then make a doc from that. Well, I started, we did a unsuccessful Kickstarter, then a successful one, and we started shooting in March of 2020. I got one interview under my belt, and then we all know what happened in March of 2020, right? The pandemic.
Terrible timing.
Bad timing, but I interviewed Frank Meyer. I had all these other people that I was going to do in-person interviews in a studio. We built the studio. It's really cool. And then that happened, and then it was like a year of like, we don't know what the world is going to be. The rules in the state of California for doing a COVID compliant shoot are prohibitively expensive. I mean, just a couple, just like maybe a week of shooting that's like the whole budget of money that we had from the Kickstarter. It's like, well, we also need to release the movie too and deliver on the rewards. We can't. So I had to come up with a different way to make the film. And then when the announcement that the G4 is coming back, it's like, well, what am I going to do? That changes what the documentary is. Always in the planning stages, there was this like, I'm going to do bookends with me, kind of intro and outro the movie. I'm going to have that little post-credit scene. And then Zach Selwyn is going to be the Greek chorus, kind of telling you parts of the story that are kind of boring, but making it funny because he's talking about the Esquire network in a song, or Olivia leaving or whatever. So I always had this kind of structure, but it was going to be interviews with everyone. And I thought, well, I don't know, like, I'm going to have to make this differently. If I talk to the people behind the scenes, they're going to tell people stories. They're going to tell stories no one's ever heard. So that ended up being the structure in getting it made. Boy, you asked one question. You realize I talk a lot.
That is not a problem with this show. It's a bit more long form, so I like it when my guests talk. I'd rather them talk more and they're honest than talk less and it's like, more polite but more filtered. I don't like that.
I appreciate that. I'm sort of feeling the questions you may have, and I'm trying to answer them before you ask them.
Oh, it's like you have the Force. You're
Yes.
you're getting the responses you need before you have to give them.
Precisely. I shifted how the documentary was going to be made, and I based it on some of my favorite archival documentaries. There's Brett Morgan is one of my favorite documentary filmmakers. He made a movie called The Montage of Heck. It's about Kurt Cobain, and he did a similar thing. He basically made a movie based on stuff he found in a storage locker of stuff that Kurt Cobain had when he was a kid. That's what he made the movie from. He also did the recent Moon Age Daydream about David Bowie, also an archival documentary. Belushi, there's a really good archival documentary about John Belushi.
Yep, I've seen that one.
Oh, that one's great. They use animation. I wanted to use animation. I wasn't sure of the style. And then it kind of just like fell in my lap. Like, oh, wow, like we should just use machinima like from the very first metaverse was Second Life. Like, let's just, that's so early 2000s. So it kind of feels organic, right? There were parts of the story for which there was no supporting footage. And I was, okay, well then that's a way to do that animation. So everything kind of just fell into place that way. And I wanted to, I was also trying to evoke some emotion from people, whether you have a fondness for that era and you remember it and you used to watch G4, but also I was making the movie for two audiences. One, the fans who love G4, and two, I was making it for people who had never heard of G4 or Attack of the Show. So that was like a fine line of like, okay, I want to explain everything, why it was culturally significant. And I want, I was a fan of the show because I watched the show before I was on. I watched the screensavers and X-Play. Loved it. It was just like, it was like always on my TV. And then I got a call out of the blue to be on the show. I don't know if you want to hear that story, but Gavin Purcell's the guy who called me. He was the original executive producer, and he just offered me the gig. There was no audition because I was just sick of doing TV. I thought TV was dumb. Not that I don't also think that now, but I was just tired of the television I had done previously for other networks. They were always trying to make me cool and hip me up, and I'm like, have you looked at me? I'm not cool. I've usually got a nerdy t-shirt on. I'm in a room surrounded by ephemera and collectible stuff. So, he brought me in because he had done a segment for National Enquirer TV of all things. And he remembered me, Gavin, and he brought me in. He's like, look, we want you to be our movie guy and do a segment called DV Tuesday on the screensavers. And I said, look, I've had some not great experiences with TV. I said, I have 3 requests. 1, I want to be able to wear whatever I want. Like any t-shirt, my favorite band, film thread. I'm just going to wear like stuff that I like. I'm going to wear on the show. And then I want to be able to say whatever I want within reason. Whatever I say is my opinion. I'm not produced by someone telling me what to say. What I say is how I really feel about something. And then 3, I want to be able to keep all the DVDs that I review. And he said, well, I can agree.
That's a nice perk.
Yeah. I was like, I'll get all these free DVDs. Because trust me, they were not offering me a lot of money. I think it was like $250 a segment. That's what I was offered. Okay. I was the lowest paid person at G4 among all the hosts. I also didn't care because I wasn't full-time. I came in, they had me on call in case like Kevin got sick. I was like Chekhov sitting in the captain's chair. Like if no one was available, I would have to host the show. And I did host episodes of the show every once in a while. And Gavin said, well, I can agree to the first 2, but I can't agree to the last one because we have to keep the DVDs in a producer's library in case we need footage from those movies, which I come to find out later was basically a shelf where producers would steal DVDs and just take them home. So when I said
these for work purposes,
that's exactly right. So when I said buy on the DV Tuesday segment, I actually bought the DVD. So there you go. Funny enough, I did get in an argument once with one of the standards and practices person at G4. I wore a shirt, and I remember doing this segment with Olivia Munn. I wore a shirt that said, I heart your vagina. And it was from one of my favorite local LA bands called Get Set Go. I Heart Your Vagina. It was like, oh, I'm going to wear this for our Valentine's Day show. It's a t-shirt that has a heart on it, whatever. So I went in, and you can't wear that shirt on the show. The lawyer at G4 said, you cannot wear that shirt on the show. So why can't? I said, it's the word vagina. I said, vagina is a medical term. They say the word vagina multiple times on any given episode of Oprah. I can wear this shirt. So I won, and I got to wear the shirt. I heart your vagina. Then I found out later from another standards and practices guy, this lawyer, Keith, I found out I could mispronounce swear words. So I would say, this director is a total shittheed. And I got away with it. It was good. I was always looking for ways to get away with little things. I was learning, like, with my then girlfriend, I was learning American Sign Language. So I would sign things before, when they would just sort of come to me silently. I would go like this, which in American Sign Language is bullshit. So I was just doing all that, and I guess the person they did closed captioning was done by real people back then. It wasn't computer generated. And I always make that person laugh because they knew what I was saying with ASL. So there's a lot. I was always looking for but I will say truthfully that G4 Attack of the Show was my best experience in TV. I was able to be myself on camera, and previously I was not able to. So I was authentically me. Kevin Pereira really, I think, set the tone for everything. I think he, to me, was the best person I ever worked with in television. He was my hero. I learned so much from him. He was always upping my game. He was a master improv comedian and a brilliant mind, incredibly intelligent, and just had an air on the set. He knew the name of every person on the crew, down to the gaffer. I came in, a couple times a week, and I never got to learn everybody's name. He knew everybody. His on-camera demeanor he was Bugs Bunny. He was there to mess with everybody. He messed with Daffy Duck. He messed with Elmer Fudd. He was an irritant for entertainment, if that makes sense. But off camera, he's the nicest guy on the planet. And it was an honor to work with him.
That's what I've heard too about Kevin. Even when I was reporting on the stuff going on with modern G4, and I talked to some people, no one had a bad word about Kevin. They felt bad for him because they felt like he was trying to carry the whole network, the whole project on his back. But as a person, everyone liked working with him. There's not a single bad word.
Yep. No one from the crew. Everyone only sings Kevin's praises. He's just great. It's just his off camera. He treated people like they were celebrities, everybody.
This is a good question. My friend, Jake, who did a review of your film for Clownfish, did you ever talk with Kevin or Olivia, some of the people that we hear about them, but we don't hear from them in the documentary? Did you ever reach out, or they say they couldn't do it, or anything like that?
Well, the original plan was to start sort of with smaller people who worked on the crew and eventually work my way up to Kevin. That was my plan. I did reach out to Kevin via, I don't know if you know, he disappeared for a year. And I went through, I reached out to him directly. I reached out to, through Robert Juster, who's in the doc. And he did a thing where he unplugged for a year, sold his house, got one of those Surfliner trailers, and just went off the grid. He was unreachable.
Really?
He did.
That's
This was before G4. So I was trying to reach him before the new G4 launched. And so he's very, I'm not going to say he's bad. He is not really interested in that kind of communication, is what I think. Also, I launched this thinking, well, I'll get them at the end of the process. What I realized in going through the process, I don't know that the movie would have been better with Kevin or Olivia in it. Here's the problem. Getting major talent involved in a project like this. It's not my project anymore. right? It's a completely different story. It's a completely different documentary, which I know would have been, I mean, even some of the other people that I put in the doc were like, do you have to use this footage of me? Can you use that? It's like, no, I want Final Cut. There's no way I'm doing this unless I have Final Cut. I'm making this for fans, right? Kevin and Olivia have a story to tell, but it's not my story to tell for them, if that makes sense, right? So at some point, Olivia did write a book, which is hysterical, by the way. Her book, which she's often attacked for because people don't realize she was joking. She wrote like sort of a half-true, half-joking autobiography. And it's amazing. But yeah, I did reach out to Kevin, and he was the person that I wanted to get. And even getting the people that I did are in the doc, he just was unresponsive. You make of that what you will. It's fine. But because I would argue that ultimately, I don't know that the movie would be better. The other thing is, I had scoured through all sorts of things that Kevin had said on podcasts. He had the Pointless podcast, things that Olivia had said in interviews. And I kind of feel like everything they wanted to say about G4, they had already said on podcasts and other interviews. What new information would I get for this doc? So, and it's not as if there couldn't be another film. Sure, someday if they see it. But ultimately I decided, like, in order to make the film that I want to keep it purely the people behind the scenes, because their stories are untold, right? John Ryber, who's main executive, Robert Juster, who was there at the beginning in 2002 when G4 started, Alan Wu and Genji Keen, the directors, collectively directed over 1,000 episodes of the show. The stories you're hearing and the people I chose to be in the doc, Casey Schreiner, the head writer of Attack of the Show, these are all people whose stories, they're not doing podcasts. They're not famous. I want to hear their stories. I didn't want to regurgitate things that Kevin had already said on other shows. I kind of feel like everything, because right after G4 ended, Kevin was doing the Pointless podcast and he would have people on, and, I was on even. And, he kind of just like got it out of his system. And I didn't want to make a movie where, look, I didn't want Kevin and Olivia to take over the doc. I wanted to make a very specific type of documentary that documented the era, about nerd culture, why we're kind of divided, even about nerd stuff now. That's sort of a small thread. I wanted to comment on, there's a song in the doc from Zach Selwyn, "You Can't Do That No More." That was from the very beginning. Like a thing, like culture has changed so much. In any given day on an episode of Attack of the Show, you could get canceled for something that had happened.
Yes.
On the show.
We've even had, even since the last year covering the G4 stuff, we've had multiple things where some old episode of X-Player Attack of the Show comes up, and then you have a quick cycle where people are like, how could you believe how terrible those are? The most recent one, I think, is they did when all of you went down to Japan. So you were doing
I didn't
Japan
go to that.
theme.
That wasn't me, but that wasn't me.
Yeah. When
I was in a part.
When the G4TV hosts were in Japan and they did Japanese themed episodes, people are now looking at the X-Play one. They're saying, oh, this is racist, yada, yada, yada. But, maybe in some ways it is, but generally this was all comedy. It was insincere, and everyone that watched it knew it. No one was actually believing that Adam Sandler actually felt that way about the Japanese. It was just like, this is all a joke.
Yeah, I think, well, there is sort of a type of person that, traffic lights are racist. You know what I mean? It's like, we got to lighten up a little bit. Got to lighten up, maybe like expand your friend group a little bit beyond people who see the world through racist colored glasses. I knew Adam Sessler is not racist at all. I mean, his wife is not white, by the way.
Interesting. I did not know that.
She is Asian. So I don't know if that gives him a pass, but I can't speak for Adam. Adam is Adam. We now are, they call it presentism. It's when you judge the past through present day lens, which is, I think, a stupid way to go about the world. You know, you could look at that and go, okay, like when I was growing up and watching, I loved film noir movies when I was a kid. Okay. And I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. And I would watch these old movies. One of the ways that I learned to calm a woman down if she was hysterical or out of control or screaming or upset was you would just slap her in the face, and then that would calm a woman down. Now, as a kid, when I saw that, I was shocked. I didn't think I wanted to cancel that film noir movie, but I was like, oh, wow. And then that's just something we look back on as like, yeah, it's not a thing to do. But I don't think about like canceling or going, we should ban all these movies or have some trigger warning at the beginning, because that tells me that the person watching it is stupid. And I assume that the people that like my stuff are smart. They don't need that warning, right? If I need to tell you that this is a joke, it's not a joke. It's, so I don't like to pander to the audience. They need to be able to keep up. That's what I always loved about Kevin. I couldn't keep up with Kevin, and I was standing next to him, okay, during a lot of the segments. But I wanted to like show, like, look, we're probably not going to do those things anymore. You can't do that no more. But it was funny for its era. We could appreciate it. We don't have to turn our back on the legacy of the past, from the old show. There wouldn't have been a new G4 if there wasn't an old G4. There wouldn't be people who are excited about the new G4 if the old G4 hadn't existed. Same goes for Star Trek, Star Wars, name a franchise that's been rebooted, right? I think if you turn your back on the legacy of the past, I look on that as a betrayal of the audience that built a fandom to begin with. So part of making the documentary was to leave something of a legacy, because I believe it's a very valid criticism to say, well, why didn't you get Kevin and Olivia for the documentary? And I say, well, it would have been a different documentary, and it wouldn't have been the film that I wanted to make. And it would have been a much more expensive documentary. Not to get into like financial, minutia, but even a modest budgeted documentary a small documentary costs $300,000. We had about 70,000 to make, release it, deliver rewards. So, and a friend of mine just made a documentary for Peacock. It's an amazing documentary. His budget was $3 million. That's travel, insurance. That's you're paying interview subjects. You're paying for hair and makeup for people. You're paying location fees. You're getting clearances. You have attorneys. Literally, this movie was made by about 4 or 5 people. That's it. 4 or 5 people working part-time for 3 years as the story is changing. So it would be a different documentary. And I could still make that doc. I could still do. In fact, I have so much footage. We created this library. We could do a documentary mini-series, 6 40-minute episodes, 30-minute episodes. I could do that, all about G4, include X-Play in there, because X-Play is mentioned, but it's not a big part of the doc. It could be a documentary series. If Peacock would like to hire me to make a documentary series.
You're ready. You just pick up the phone.
I mean, just the female talent alone, and this is just the reality of making films. The female talent, you need to have hair, makeup, wardrobe. Those people are anywhere. If they're doing you a favor, they're $700 a day. Then you need the location. I mean, I could go through the math, and I knew I couldn't make that documentary. So I've got to make an archival doc, and it's got to be a different way into the story. And the different way in were the people who were in the control room, the people who were in the field shooting, the people who were there, like Casey Schreiner, who was the head writer, who played Office Jesus, And I thought, well, we haven't heard that. Plus, I wanted the movie to be 90 minutes. Because, seriously, to get people to watch something these days.
Yeah, low attention span.
Oh my God, I'm already dreading seeing Guardians. It's 2.5 hours. Couldn't you make it 2 hours, James? Please, James Gunn, 2 hours. That's all I ask.
Yeah, but he's been sitting on the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 project, 5 years now, 6 years?
Right, yeah.
So I'm sure he has a lot he wants to get out. that this isn't a huge point, but I was curious. How do you get all that archival footage? Do you have to pay Comcast access to it, or did you know someone over there? How did you get that?
I kept on a personal hard drive episodes of the show from a DVR that I had. I also got, whenever I was like on a show, like, oh, that was a good DVDs day. Can I get a copy? They had a department, the editing department, which said, oh, we'll burn you a DVD. So they burned me DVDs. I personally collected, and I had a hard drive filled with stuff. I got stuff from Zach Selwyn. There was another guy named Christopher Flynn who worked on the show, who also gave us photos and video that he personally shot. Same thing with John Ryber. And then I hired, which was costly, the best attorney in the documentary film space. His name is Michael Donaldson. Michael Donaldson and Associates is a law firm that wrote the fair use argument. If you work in documentary film or reality, fair use is an argument about why it is fair for me to use footage. Now, for example, if someone is telling a story about Olivia Munn jumping into a cream pie, I can show footage of Olivia Munn jumping into a cream pie. It's called fair use. A person is telling us this is used in news, it's used in documentaries, and Michael Donaldson, I'll point out, successfully fought Yoko Ono over a recent legal dispute. So I basically hired the best attorney in the business so that I could legally release the movie on Google, Amazon, YouTube, coming to Vudu and other places, all that. So we have like a document that if anyone would come to us to try to sue, here's the legal document that says we have the rights to use this footage. We had to go through like with a fine tooth comb. Like I used video from a Verizon commercial, partially because what I wanted to do at the beginning of the movie was kind of ease people into the early 2000s, which is just over 20 years ago, but feels like a really long time ago. I mean, everything was standard def. You know, HD didn't really kick in until like 2005, right? And even that, it was like 720, right? So a lot of that footage was just, we spent a year not only organizing the hard drive and DVDs that I had, we transferred I had like a binder of DVDs. All of that was translated. Then it was cataloged. We spent a year, this is just after March of 2020, we spent a year making a library with keywords so I could look up pie, boom, everything related. So because I built that database and have like a hard drive database with tags and keywords, like the best of Olivia Munn, the best of Candace Bailey, best of Kevin Pereira, best of Blair Herter. Like I have, videos of that. Like it's just a montage of the best of those people. I might just, what I might do? I might just upload all of that to YouTube and someone else can make their own documentary. Because on the Blu-ray, when you get the Blu-ray, I interviewed more than 20 people from behind the scenes on the show. And on the Blu-ray, you'll be able to hear the unedited interviews with everyone. We're kind of structuring it like a podcast. So like you've got like A to Z, here's all the people. Here's, John Ryber, development executive. Here's, Casey Schreiner, head writer, Attack the Show. Well, if you want to hear them talk for an hour and a half, you could make a completely different documentary using the audio interviews that I did and the footage that we have. Make your own one at some point. I wanted to do that because I'm very much DIY, like give back. Like that's why the premiere of my movie, anybody could buy a ticket. So we had 3 screenings of the film at the Frida Cinema, which is the last independent movie theater in Southern California. And we had a premiere and like it was everyone from the movie and VIPs and there were film critics there and special guests and whatever. And then I set aside a certain block of tickets. I'm like, we're going to sell these tickets to anyone who wants to go. Anyone. Because I see the sort of BS corporate elitism that has seeped into the industry that I love, and it's changed things and not for the better. Not for the better. And so I'm more of a DIY indie guy. All are welcome. Let's go. So, yeah, I've gone off on many tangents. How you're going to...
Just a little bit. It's fine. It's fine.
No, like you do that thing and you kind of like catalog and you can just sort of go by topic. Good luck. Good luck doing that.
I'm impressed because I remember working on a student documentary and trying to work through footage from someone else. I did a documentary on a local like tower company. They put up the, like the phone towers, the cell towers, or go repair them. Just going through that, it is really time consuming. Like like what you're telling me that sounds insane. It sounds like hundreds, if not thousands of hours of work.
It was. I mean, it was thousands, but we also had like my day job is Film Threat. That's my website, right? It's a website, a YouTube channel. That's my day job, podcasting and doing whatever. I also put on an award show every year called Award This for indie film. But yeah, so everyone had day jobs, so it's like, okay, we're doing this, like, this is our part-time side thing. We're going to make a movie over the next couple of years. I mean, it went on longer, but considering there was the pandemic and G4 came back, which changed things, I made the best film I could with the resources I had in the time that I had, just over 3 years. So
I like the film. I think you did a good job. I understood what your goal was there, and you met it. Yeah, because it immersed me in that era, and you helped me understand why people liked that. Not just that the show attacked the show, but that whole generation. And we've gone way so far from it. The other big question, of course, that people are always asking, I'm sure, is like, what about the modern iteration? People are very familiar with it, I think, because of Miss Indiana Black and her comments, Frosk.
Right.
It is a very negative opinion overall for modern G4. So people are kind of wondering, why was it that included in your documentary? And also, what do you think about it? Because you actually know all the people that worked on the old one, and I'm sure they have all kinds of thoughts and feelings about the screw up that was the modern iteration of G4.
So 2 questions, and I know a bunch of people from the old G4 that worked on the new G4. So there's 2 questions. One, I did not include it in the doc for a couple reasons. One, it's not my story to tell. I wasn't there. Okay. I wasn't there. I don't have personal knowledge of things that happened behind the scenes. And it was also a fluid situation that I felt was so overcovered on YouTube. What new wrinkle could I say that would have added something? Could I add something new to say? Probably not. I also wanted the documentary to be a time capsule of what we remember and love about G4. Now, the new G4 is mentioned that it came back. And there is sort of a little, like, there's this song that Zach talks about with the new G4, and then some bicycle rider comes by with a bell, and it's like, read into that what you will.
Yeah, and then he just stops. It just is like it's going, and then it just stops.
The song stops. He sits there. It gets uncomfortable. You hear a little like bicycle bell, and that's it. Because what new am I going to say? This was so overcovered on YouTube that it's like, what new could I have said? Would Frosk have granted an interview with me? Probably not. But here's what I'll say about it. So, because I do have opinions about it. And I don't think you're going to be able to predict what I'm going to say about this. Because my opinion.
Okay, then I'm really interested.
Here you go. I didn't include it in the doc because I thought also it's like I am the benefit of G4 has been done since 2012, 2013. So perspective of time, you can look back through a different lens and you can look at it from this and you say, oh, now I kind of see what was happening then. I didn't know that working on G4 what a cultural impact it had. I believe that the legacy of G4TV are people who talk on YouTube. And my movie makes that point. That people talking on YouTube about their passions, just you're passionate, you got a mic, you can talk about it. Are you authentic? That is the thing that I think people love. That is the secret sauce of YouTube is authenticity. Okay. And that's something that, late night shows don't seem to understand. I think the news has become less authentic as the veil is lifted. You observe that like a lot of people are produced and don't really know what they're talking about. But I had the benefit of that like 50-foot view of like, oh, I see what was happening at the time at G4. We didn't have the benefit with the new G4. Literally, I did a screening at the Tucson Film Fest to students there to kind of like test the movie because we did a cut at San Diego Comic-Con. Then I did another cut that I showed there. And while I was in Tucson, found out that the G4 was ended. Like, we had what they call picture locked, right? So the picture was locked, and I was like, well, I assume the G4 will go on. I have nothing to say about it. I'm going to picture lock it. But even like as the months went on, I was like, well, someone's like, you should release the movie now. And it's like, well, one, I couldn't because of legal. I had to go through the clearance process. That took 6 months. As the legal process went on, I'm like, oh, we could time the release of Attack of the Doc to the 21st anniversary of the launch of G4TV. Well, let's do that. It seemed like a logical. So it came out on video on demand on April 21st, 2023, which is the 21st anniversary. But in that time, I was like, I wanted kind of, I hate to say this, it left a bad taste in people's mouths. And I felt sad for that because I remember what G4 was. And I was like, there's a reason people, I think, were disappointed. Having said that, now let me pivot for a second. 2 things. One, G4 was not very good when it first started on April 24th, 2002. They didn't know what they were doing. They were trying shows and throwing things at the wall. G4 didn't get good, I would argue, for 5 years of failing, trying things out. Attack of the Show launched in March of 2005. It took a while. They were allowed to make mistakes. I came in, 3 years or so, like after it launched and kind of figuring it out. It wasn't until 2007. I remember being at Comic-Con and going, wow, the show's getting really good and people seem to like it. They really enjoy it. It took 5 years. The people who worked at the new G4 did not have the benefit of failing for 5 years to come to where it could have evolved, right? They didn't have the patience. The other thing is this, because I remember when the Frosk thing happened, but I want to give you some context. When I worked at the old G4, I got to know Morgan Webb, Sarah Lane, all the people there. Well, by the way, all of the female talent got threats. When Morgan Webb went to the parking lot once just to go home from her day job, do an X-Play, there was a stalker there, which ended up with a policy. I don't know that anybody's talked about this. There was a policy that all the female talent at the network had to be escorted to their vehicles by security because of threats, not just online, but in real life. Blair Butler, this is in the doc, you'll see they had like security around like Olivia, and because they had to shadow the female talent. There were people that you saw at the front. The cosplayers that were at the front of the stage at San Diego Comic-Con, those people were all paid. They were paid to stand there to just keep other people back. Kind of like, a Fed that blends into a crowd.
But in in like a slave Leia uniform.
In a slave, who knows, a slave Leia, maybe a Han Solo, whatever. The point is that I remember that. I remember all the female talent was under a lens, and that could grate on you mentally. So when I saw what Frosk did, I felt for her. I had empathy for her because of that outburst. So I'm in 2 minds about it. One, I understand her feeling attacked, people making cruel remarks, but I'd been doing television since the late 90s. I remember when I got an email, I had a stalker, oddly, and I didn't know about this. There is a division of the Los Angeles Police Department dedicated specifically to stalkers for people who work in the entertainment industry. And I had to meet with those investigators over someone who threatened to do bodily harm to me. This is like back in 2000. I had someone send me an email that said, Chris Gore is fat. That was the email address was chrisgoreisfat@hotmail.com, and sent me a thing about what an asshole I was. Now, I'd been doing Film Threat magazine for a long time. I had a column called Hate Mail, and I'd seen this kind of thing happen. I developed rhino skin by the time I got to G4. Nothing affects me. I don't care. I laugh at it. Okay? That stuff is like, whatever. I always also try to think about the mental space that someone has to be in. What kind of person would send a threatening or cruel remark to someone that they don't know online? Who does that? People who are mentally disturbed, people who are going through something, 9-year-olds or 12-year-olds, children. These are children in adult-sized bodies in many cases. They don't have maturity. So the kinds of things that people said about Frosk, those people have problems. Okay. Having said that, that doesn't justify how she spoke about the audience. So they're kind of like two things, right? The people saying those things, it's a small group of people and they will eventually go away. Never feed a troll. Never feed a troll. Don't give them something. Don't reply to them. Don't respond to them. I don't do that unless I have something really clever and funny to say. But the way that this was handled, I believe the old G4, the way something like that would have been handled is with a joke, because I think Frosk had a point. I believe Frosk had a point. The problem is she expressed it in a way that vilified the audience. So while she had a point, and I could see, I mean, you see when she gives that speech, she has some real pain. She has a pained look on her face. You see at some moment she might, so I think she got really bad advice from her producers. They should not have allowed her, having written that speech. She should not have said that. She got bad advice from her producers. She should have informed her co-host that she was going to do this. And then when she did it, they didn't back her up. It's like, okay, you let her do it. You can't put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste, thing. What do they put toothpaste in again?
I don't know what they call it. A toothpaste bag? A toothpaste.
A toothpaste bag. Hashtag toothpaste bag. So the point is that there are multiple things here. Now, I show in the movie, there's a scene where Olivia Munn is reading teleprompter. She reads it phonetically, and she comes across Mick Hammer.
Oh, yes. I love this moment. I remember when it happened in real time.
So great. And she laughs at herself. If Frosk had come up with a way, there's a segment on Jimmy Kimmel, reading mean tweets. What does that show? One, shows you have a sense of humor about yourself. It diminishes the power that person saying those things has over you. Because that's my attitude is, yeah, you can try to say stuff like that. I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. You don't get power over me. You don't even get the pleasure of seeing me upset. Sorry, I'm going to go be me. You can call me problematic. If you listen to me for any length of time, you realize that in between some of the lowbrow humor, I occasionally have something intelligent to say. If you watch me for any length of time, or if you know that I'm the author of several books, or I've been writing about films since the 80s. I started Film Threat in 1985, been around the space a while, seen a lot of crazy things around this galaxy. Okay. But I felt for Frosk like I would like, I really felt for her. And then I thought, oh no, like this is going to backfire. So while I agreed with the sentiments of her statement, the way it was delivered was to vilify the very audience she was trying to court to watch the show every week. Bad advice from producers. It could have been a comedy segment where, I mean, I don't know, they could have had her come out and they could have, I mean, whatever. First of all, and by the way, I think Frosk is a very attractive woman. So for her to even feel that, clearly she has some insecurities. Very attractive woman who embraced who she was, and good for her. Good for her. So I felt for her and I thought, oh my God, it's like I felt like they threw her under the bus.
Yes, total agree on that.
They threw her under the bus, even though the point she was making, I believe, was a valid point. Especially, I knew the context. I knew, and I know that like Morgan Webb, for example, regretted posing in a bikini in Maxim magazine because she felt it diminished who she was. Morgan Webb is incredibly intelligent, legitimate gamer. So yes, did they make the female talent on the network sexy? Yes. Did that help the show? Yes. Could there have been a better balance? Yes. All of those things. But I think the legacy of G4 is important, how they got there. But it was a matter of trying to thread the needle between, you've got people who think a certain way, it's an overused word, sort of woke progressive stuff. But the audience, for the most part, people who like video games are politically agnostic. They just don't care. They don't watch the news. They don't care. They're not, and I don't think that anybody likes to be lectured to. There are ways of making points that are political points where it's funny, But what Frosk was reacting to, I saw firsthand. Things that was always like a thing of like, well, okay, because they never cared about the male talent, to be clear.
You could have 10 stalkers in the parking lot. They wouldn't do anything.
The only problem with me was I love talking to people. I love to talk to people. You're getting a dose of that right now. I love to talk to people, especially if you're a nerd and we connect on something like, oh my God, you're into this. Oh, like remember the N64 Shadows of the Empire, could go on and on about stuff, but my problem with walking through a crowd is I'm going to talk to people and then I'll be late to something. With Blair Butler, people were genuinely, they were attracted to her. They're people that are, they've got something in their head, but I always try to think about that other person and like, well, maybe that person had a bad day. There's a really good story that, because I think because of social media, we've become less empathetic. And there's a really good story in a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I don't know if you've read that book.
I have not.
I am a nerd for like little wonky business books. I feel like The 4-Hour Work Week or The No Asshole Rule is another good book. I love those books because I always take away one really good, that's a great nugget. I'm going to work that into my personal life. There's a great story told in that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, where a bunch of people are on a subway in New York, and a guy walks in with his 2 kids, and he just sits down, and the 2 kids are running around, totally like not being supervised by the dad. They're like grabbing things and pounding them and going around and annoying everybody in the train car. And the people in the train car are looking at this dude like, dude, control your kids. Finally, someone speaks up and says, sir, would you please get your kids to calm down? They're disrupting everyone here. And he was like, immediately kind of like came out of a fog and said, oh, I'm so sorry. We just got back from the hospital. Their mother passed away. You never know the context in which someone, I believe people that lash out, especially to strangers online, something's wrong. They're being bullied at school. They're going through maybe some tragedy. Could be the loss of a loved one, loss of a partner. And I always look, I'm like, that person's not in the right space. Set phasers to ignore. And I tend to ignore it unless I have something really clever and funny, like a good retort. But even then, I don't use social media as much as I used to. I use it to promote my projects. I don't use it. I used to make a lot of friends on social media, not as much anymore. But I don't care. I've always been, to be clear, for those who think I'm problematic, I have always been a sarcastic asshole. I was a sarcastic asshole when I started Film Threat in 1985. I was a sarcastic asshole when I moved to the West Coast and Film Threat grew into a big magazine. When I got my first TV gig on the X show, which was on the FX network, I was a sarcastic asshole. I think I got hired because I was a sarcastic asshole. When I got hired at G4TV, part of the reason might have been because I was a sarcastic asshole. I have not changed. I think people's level of tolerance and sensitivity to jokes or the understanding of humor, because to me, to understand humor requires intelligence. Because you have to connect dots from several different things to get a really... So when you go to like the really obscure like comedians like a Stephen Wright or something that have kind of a softer level humor, like I love that, like connecting of the dots. I like dry wit and dry humor. It's part of why I loved X-Play, was I couldn't believe the kind of jokes they were making. They're writing reviews of video games, talking about these video game reviews and working in like, philosophical, like Chaucer references. It's like, oh, well, I have to look that one up, It's bizarre. But yeah, so I was in two minds about it. I thought, oh my God, who gave her such terrible advice? And then two, I felt for her And then 3, I thought that was not the right way to express how she felt, because she could have, there's a way to make the audience feel bad about how they conducted themselves. When someone points out their bad behavior, but do it with a joke. That would have been the G4, old G4, old Attack of the Show, old any of that stuff, X-Play would have handled that with a joke. But behind the scenes, I happen to know that all the female talent, were, they had to deal with stuff like that. They had to deal with stuff like that, to the point where it's like email was filtered. The male talent we didn't get. I mean, I got stuff like, a lot of it was just like people giving me shit because they didn't agree with my opinion on a DV Tuesday. Occasionally it's live TV. I made a mistake. I'd feel so horrible. Like, oh my God, how could I have made that mistake? I meant this actor, but I said this actor. And then after I'd look on social media, everyone's like, Gore said the wrong. And I'm just like, I got to wait a week to correct it. And I would jump into the comments and say, no, actually, you're right. I screwed up. I really have a lot of tremendous respect and gratitude to the audience that they even care about what I do. Right. I'm a guy who has a lot of strong opinions about movies, and I don't care if yours are different. It's the only opportunity I have to learn is if I engage with someone whose opinion differs from my own. I've always felt that way. Just that's true of any conversation. It's like, well, how do I learn if I'm in an echo chamber? Who cares about that? But to see, and what Frosk went through, she, and then I had people that I loved who I knew in the YouTube space talking about stuff. And I'm like, I'll tell you my opinion. You can have your own. I don't have to agree with you. But she really was not well served by the people there. And I watched her interview, the interview she did with you. I thought it was great. You did a great job. And
thank you.
I felt for her, I felt for her. She's not going to talk to me. I mean, I'm making a documentary about the old G4. I'm a sarcastic asshole. She probably wouldn't like me personally. I'm very much a smart ass.
I don't know about that, because actually getting to talk with Frost, she's a bit more of a nerd's nerd than I think she came off. True, she's actually into a lot of this stuff more so than I think people realize, and that didn't come across.
I thought she added to the new group, she was just she was herself, and she was authentic. She wasn't trying to be a branded thing of whatever. No, she was just her. And she is, and I don't know, I thought she was cool. She also looked different than everybody. No, you shouldn't hire 5 Olivias, she was just different. And, I don't know. But I felt for her. It was just, the whole thing was oh my God. I didn't realize though. I mean, who knows if that, you could sit there and speculate with time, maybe 5 years from now, someone could make Attack of the Doc 2. I mean, you could. I mean, because if I was going to do justice to the story of the new G4, that's a whole documentary, and it would have been interesting, but I would need access. And I do think that there was a little bit, I'm only speculating, stay with me on this. I think that when it was announced that the new G4 was coming back, I don't have proof of this. There may have been people who said, yeah, we know Gore's making this documentary. We're not exactly sure what he's doing, but if you want to be involved in the new G4, maybe you shouldn't be involved in his documentary. I'm not saying I have no proof, but people I reached out to who were involved in the new G4 weren't getting back to me. I'm not saying it's true. I have no evidence, but they did not help. One of the things they did say, Blair Herter told me, well, we'll look at the doc and maybe we can buy it to run on the network. It's oh, cool. I'm still going to make the movie I want to make. And I thought, well, maybe we could edit a 50-minute version for G4. I'll have my 90-minute version, which is the director's cut, but we'll have a 50-minute version that could air on the network. That'll be the corporate approved version. And, maybe I'll change my name on it or whatever. But and so that actually goes back to your earlier question about Kevin and Olivia not being in it. I think the new G4 was, the new G4 coming back was kind of maybe a ghost cock blocker to getting people that I wanted to be in the doc. I have no proof.
Okay, but let me jump in here with you, Chris.
Please.
Okay, so
Please.
I largely agree with you, and this has gotten me in trouble with a lot of people. A lot of the same people that you go on YouTube with or talk to. I wouldn't necessarily say they're more right wing, but they're more traditionalist kind of nerds. And I started there with Frost because I was very negative, but then I actually, researched and reported and actually talked with people, and that kind of moved me because I saw more of the human element. I feel like there were, yes, that the people they had there had more of a lefty political edge to kind of reflect the culture of the day. But the one thing I think that is majorly different, you can tell me if I'm wrong, between your day back in the heydays of Attack on the Show when everyone loved that and I explained the rest, versus the one that just died on the vine, was that there was a huge middle management problem at Comcast Spectacor. I mean, they were constantly being undermined and controlled by what they could say or do or not do. But they still demanded like a huge amount of content by any of the teams to be made in any 1 week. But they had always so much control on top of them. The middle management was insane, and they weren't officially producers, but they were basically taking, the producers would make a decision, and then they would just, change it. And so that made it possible for Frost or anything else, production-wise, to put out something that was more concrete, that was more fun, because people undermine you. It's hard really to get any work done. To the point they had a problem. She has a great point in the interview. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, I do remember.
They hired her, and they first want her to do like an esports show. She's like, okay, we're doing an esports news show. All right. So obviously we're going to have B-roll footage of esports. That would make sense, right? I'd be like, oh no, you can't do that.
No, I would refer people to the interview you did with her. She, it sounded like it was a mess. The old G4 was like, they had everyone on a very, very long leash. And we rarely even talked about politics. I didn't really even know where people's politics are. Like I say, I grew up when nerd culture was not a cool thing. I bought X-Men #1 for $12, and that was a lot of money that I saved for my newspaper route. So I wanted to show how culture changed, starting from like 2000 to kind of bring us up present and show it wasn't cool when it first started, how it's changed. Maybe we shouldn't be so divided by design. In that sequence where I show a bunch of YouTubers, they're all over the political spectrum on purpose. Because we should be able to talk to each other.
Agree.
We should be able to have discussions. We should be able to, I believe when I say we, not just we as nerds, we as Americans, we as citizens of the planet Earth, we should be able to solve any problem. But if we can't solve the problem of talking to each other respectfully on the internet, we will solve no problems. Both sides to be represented without any sway towards one or the other. Now, the individual people who work at Film Threat, they can have their own persuasions, and they're free to express those in their articles. That's their author's name is on there. That's fine. But as a media outlet, Film Threat does not sway one way or another, and I've kept it that way from the beginning, and that's the way it will always be. With me in charge, and I own it, so I can't really, what am I supposed to do? Fire myself, cancel myself? I'm not going to do that. But I find it dangerous when you are tend to favor one over the other wherever you feel. And I have friends on all sides of the political spectrum. I have friends of all types of persuasions. You live in California, you have if you're an open-minded, you have a varied film, a friend group, right? Or film group. I have a movie meetup group every Thursday. We go to see movies every Thursday.
Sounds fun.
In Burbank. It's really fun. But yeah, I think it's dangerous when you go down that road because, and I saw people doing that on some of the G4 talent. People had, social media feeds that I thought, well, this isn't going to help your brand. This is a bad decision to say this, even if it is how you truly feel in your heart, was awful. And my view is also I might be more conservative when it comes to a certain thing. Certainly when it comes to raising children, because I've raised 2 adult children and my goal always, this is true, I remember saying this, I'm going to raise 2 kids in LA that aren't assholes. I'm serious. But when it comes to other stuff,
tough goal.
I have been to RuPaul's Drag Con at the LA Convention Center. It's a blast. I've been to Hamburger Mary on Santa Monica Boulevard has the most fun drag queen bingo you'll ever go to. So I'm all over the place when it comes to, I believe people, I believe, especially having come from Michigan, from the Midwest, where I have but most of my views are very common sense. But we live in a bit very, like, sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't actually have to have an opinion about that. Whereas I feel there's certain people that feel like they have to have an opinion, not only have an opinion about a topic they don't really know a lot about, but have the right one. And I'm like, well, I don't really know enough about that to even have an opinion about it. So I kind of like, look, all I can say is this: I'm a big freaking movie nerd. That's not going away. And if I feel like I'm educated enough on a topic, like I might form an opinion, which is also my opinions are fluid. My opinions are fluid. I'll say that.
I understand. My 2 points there, and I'll just quickly end the point and ask, because I have actually a question I really do want to hear from you about the state of culture. My point was that when you guys, and you talked about I just really love your documentary, because I was someone, I really, when I was coming of age, G4TV was just getting popular, and that fed so much my love of nerdery, of video games, of the way people communicate to each other. My interest in journalism, a lot of it, being a journalist, came kind of the idea of the stuff that was done on your network. The E3 coverage was something I always looked forward to. I thought G4 always knocked that out of the park, just excellent. RIP to E3. But when you talk about the documentary, where like you're on E3, you're basically doing like 18 to 20 hour work days to put out the content. You sleep 5 hours, you do it again. You don't have time to always going to upper management or middle management all the time to see what you can or cannot say, versus that, which gives, you guys have more authorship. It's almost like a smaller production versus what they were doing at the new Comcast, which is like they were trying to manufacture virality and this feeling of being organic, but they didn't actually let it be organic. They didn't let it like grow from the bottom up. They tried to just, magic it to happen, and it just didn't work.
I felt like it needed maybe a strong leader who understood geek culture. I don't see how you launch G4 without looking how the landscape has changed. The landscape of geek culture has changed dramatically. I mean, look at something I watched while I was at G4, Red Letter Media. I love those guys. Those guys are great. I remember watching when they did the Mr. Plinkett review of episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Remember that?
I love the Mr. Plinkett Star Wars and Star Trek views. They're great.
They uploaded that review when you could only, the maximum clip you could upload to YouTube was 10 minutes. And there were 7 parts. It was like, chef's kiss. So now you look at Red Letter Media, high production values. They sort of half script stuff. Those guys are filmmakers in their own right. If you've ever seen Space Cop, available on Blu-ray, there's a recommendation for you. The landscape's changed. And I think that they really needed to look at how the landscape has changed, how geek culture has changed. And I think that they leaned a little bit too much into, well, the young people know what's going on. Well, they know some, but they haven't worked on a TV show that has appealed to millions of people. So there needed to be strong leadership there to guide. And I don't know that the leadership that was there had an innate understanding of nerd culture. Like, look, I'm a lifelong geek, okay? I remember when being a nerd wasn't cool. That's why I made the documentary. I wanted to remind people there was an era before social media, Marvel, all this. We take it for granted that you can just go to like a Target and get an Iron Man t-shirt. Okay. I remember being teased for having comics when I was a kid. I remember going to the Detroit Auto Show. You go to the Detroit Auto Show, they'd have a room off to the side and they'd be selling comic books in a room. Then in another room, they had 16 millimeter prints of old episodes of the original Star Trek series. And then doing a signing was Leonard Nimoy and Burt Ward and Adam West. And I got a signed picture with Leonard Nimoy. And I was dressed.
That is an incredible meetup. Wow.
No, this This is in the 70s and 80s before comic conventions were a thing.
Gosh.
So what I was trying to do with the
Burt
doc
Ward's
was
still alive. I think I don't know. I think most of those guys have passed away now.
Yeah. Well, Adam West hasn't, so is Leonard Nimoy. Burt Ward's still around. But I grew up when nerd culture was not a cool thing. I bought X-Men #1 for $12, and that was a lot of money that I saved for my newspaper route. So I wanted to show how culture changed, starting from like 2000 to kind of bring us up present, and show it wasn't cool when it first started, how it's changed. Maybe we shouldn't be so divided by design. In that sequence where I show a bunch of YouTubers, they're all over the political spectrum on purpose, because we should be able to talk to each other.
Agree.
We should be able to have discussions. We should be able to, I believe when I say we, not just we as nerds, we as Americans, we as citizens of the planet Earth, we should be able to solve any problem. But if we can't solve the problem of talking to each other respectfully on the internet, we will solve no problems. And not like I'm trying to give some highfalutin thing about why I made the doc. Part of why I made the doc was like, I just want to touch on that as an issue, not in a lectury way, but it's there if you look for it. If you hear the conversations, the type of questions I was asking, the stuff that's in there in the doc, it's, because it does lean into like, that some of the things that were done on the show were controversial. And like how things were handled, but it's there. And it was, even in some of the songs that Zach did, all I came up with was write a song about this. And I made a list of a bunch of things to write songs about. You can't do that no more was like, can't do that no more was like, that was a name of a folder that we had. You can't do that. Like, we didn't know what to call it. It's like, well, you can't do that no more. You can't anymore. You can't do that anymore. And so that became it was the biggest folder of anything that we had in terms of the intersecting, the way things intersected with it's a best of Olivia, but there was a thing that happened on the show. It's like, you can't do that. There's a thing with Candace where you can't do that. And I was looking oh, that's kind of a thread, and I'm not, and also the doc doesn't judge what, and this is also by design. People say things in the documentary that contradict each other on purpose. There are people that say I'm a California liberal and I think we've gone too far. There's someone that says, well, that was bad for back then. I purposely took statements that contradicted and I put them together because we should all be able to have a voice, and we can disagree, and that's okay.
This is kind of, I think this is, I could be here talking with you for hours because your
Let's
career
keep going.
is just, you have a fabulous career because you've done film threats and you've been in the film criticism community. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of 50 movies. I mean, you're a fascinating character. So why I said at the beginning that you're problematic is because I was talking to some friends like, oh, hey, I'm going to interview Chris Gore. He's someone that I've followed for a long time, so I'm looking forward to this. And one of my friends who's more left was like, oh, I don't know if you should be talking to him. He's problematic. I was like, well, how is he problematic?
Why?
How is he problematic? Because he talks to the wrong people. And then I've looked it up, and there are some articles like this online. I think I read something on The Gamer, which is kind of a weird place to have it, where they're like, he talks to the bad people. So you're willing to go on all kinds of shows, and that might be Nerdrotics with Gary Bueller, or it might be someone that's a more conventional person, and it doesn't seem to bother you. But there does seem
because can I just say, I can swear on your show?
Yeah, that's fine.
I can disagree with someone and talk to them because I'm a fucking adult. And if you go out in the world and you want to you want to be a success, if you have that attitude that your friend has, that person will never succeed. Because to succeed in business, you have to talk to a lot of people you may not agree with. I don't care what my gaffer's opinion is about this. And Gary Beekler, I'm on a show every week. We disagree about a bunch of stuff. He does things where it's just like, well, I wouldn't do that, but that's me. My show is my show. His show is his show. But I talk to people. And I first of all, when I first started doing stuff with him, people are like, I'm like, I don't give a shit. I'm going to talk to whoever I want to talk about. I'm not going to have people tell me I can't talk to people. And you know who talks to bad people all the time? Our government, because you have to, because there are bad people in the world.
Anytime you have to talk with the IRS. Yeah.
Or if you want to talk, you got to talk to bad people all the time that you don't like. How do we not get in a war with people? You know what we do? We talk to them. And that this is a prevailing attitude, and I see this in young people, that it's bad or this is bad. They don't even know why it's bad because they haven't actually looked at these people long enough to know they're bad. Now, there's some stuff that Gary, I'm just like, ooh, I kind of cringe. I'm like, I wouldn't do that, but I just don't do that. But I don't tell Gary what to do, and I don't tell Gary what to think, and I don't tell Gary what to like. He can like what he likes, and he can do what he wants, and that's his show. And I like what I like, and I do my show. And sometimes I'm on his show, and sometimes, well, he's actually never been on my show, but that's okay. My show's too small.
Be like, you should give him a little nudge, like, hey.
I'll bug him. I love Gary. Look, I judge people as people, okay? And you can have, if you start not dealing with people because of opinions that they have, you will never have any friends. Tell that to your friend. And problematic is a stupid word because it's a word that isn't specific. It's like the word interesting. Interesting is a dumb word. Never use that word. Do you know why? It doesn't say anything. It's non-specific. That's interesting. Really, what's interesting about it? It's a weak word. And same thing with problematic. It's a word used by young people who don't have life experience because they haven't been around the real world. They haven't run businesses. They haven't dealt with types of people at all levels. Look, I came from a home. My parents, I'm not unusual, okay? Parents got divorced at a young age, raised by a single mom, had newspaper routes when I was a kid, worked my ass off, went to a community college because I couldn't afford to go to a big school. What did I do? My mom came out when I was like, I don't know, I was 19 years old. I was going to Wayne State University in Michigan. Why? It's a commuter school. I was working 3 jobs, okay, to be able to afford to go to college. But I couldn't afford to go to where I wanted to go. Where did I want to go? I wanted to go to USC because that's where George Lucas went. I wanted to go to that film school. Couldn't afford to go. My mom takes me out and we come to California to visit my uncle who lived in California. And I said, I want to do one thing. Everyone's like, well, we're going to go to Disneyland. I want to do one thing. I want to go to the campus of USC. Went to the bookstore and I bought every book that I could afford that was in the film program. Because I said to myself, I said, if I can't afford the tuition where these rich motherfuckers going to USC, if I can't afford it, I will read all of the same books that they read. I'll read every single one. I filled my suitcase with books I'd purchased and saved for. I wrote down the titles and authors for all the other books, and I read every fucking book. And because the financial strain, my parents couldn't afford to put me through school, the financial aid didn't really help. I dropped out of college after 2 years, but I read all those books and I started Film Threat magazine in 1985. Years later, I wrote a book called The Ultimate Film Festival Survival Guide. Doesn't tell you anything about how to make a movie, but it tells you how to get your movie into a festival, how to do your own publicity, how to sell your movie to a distributor. Very useful things for an indie filmmaker. There's not one sentence about how to make a movie. But it's how to sell, distribute, and get your movie into a film festival. I did 4 editions of that book. It became required reading as part of the independent film studies at the American Film Institute, USC, UCLA, and I love giving this exact same speech. Whenever I go to USC to give a speech, I tell the kids there that I'm here doing a talk where you can ask me questions. You bought my book. I couldn't afford to go here. But there are many correct pathways to getting towards the result, that results-oriented thinking. I've always been a very positive, optimistic person. I've always been free with information, giving people info and phone numbers and emails and like, well, what's your goal? What do you want to do? Everybody gets stuck creatively in a place. How can I help? But this attitude of those are the bad people, that is going to destroy this country. And I don't agree with it. I think it is evil. It is a bad place to be to those people. All those people, we all should be talking. We all should be talking to each other. And we could completely disagree. I'll tell you something I'm doing actually starting this week. I'm doing a show called Critics Court, Star Wars on Trial.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
I'm putting Lucas.
I just said that word. I wasn't supposed to use that word. I bet.
Interesting is good, but you should stop using that word. That sounds fucking cool. Should be the 2 words out of your mouth. With the apostrophe, no N, no G, silent G. The show is called it's Critics Court Star Wars on Trial. I'm putting Lucasfilm on trial for the murder of the Star Wars franchise. I am bringing on people, maybe Gary from Nerdrotic, to argue that Lucasfilm killed Star Wars. And I am also bringing on, for the defense, people who love the new Star Wars, who love Season 3 of Mandalorian, and I want them to get them to talk to each other. Why am I doing that? Because of everything I just previously told you. We have to stop calling people problematic. We have to listen. We have to look at points logically. We have to get a fucking sense of humor and communicate. And that's how we solve problems. That's how we come to understanding. That's how we have empathy. There's a very popular thing, which I think is wrong, about I need to have someone who looks like, first of all, I believe that diversity and inclusion is actually really important. I believe that. I agree with it. But I grew up with a lot of TV shows that were diverse and inclusive. I just was. My favorite show growing up when I was a kid was called What's Happening? You've never heard of this show. Look it up. What's Happening? All black family. Single mom raising a son named Raj. He has horn-rimmed glasses. He's kind of the nerd. He has a friend called Rerun. And I love that show. I didn't look like Raj. I identified with him because, one, the single mom thing, that kind of got me. Number two, he wore glasses. I wore glasses when I was a kid. You know, I since had the laser eye surgery, but I was a nerd. I did have glasses, and I identified with him. The thing is this, to me, the whole point of all fiction, comic books, movies, video games, novels, is for you to be able to identify with someone who isn't you. I don't want to read a book about like that where a guy who's just like me. I would find that book very boring. I would find it interesting. But the point is that the more you experience fiction with people that don't look like you, the more you develop a sense of empathy. You know, Ripley, to me, I liked Ripley as a character in Alien, not just because she got down to her skivvies and was in her underwear. Very attractive Sigourney Weaver, still very attractive in my opinion. She was the smartest one. She said, don't bring Kane on the ship. Don't do this. She was the smartest one in the room, smarter than the captain, Captain Dallas. So to me, I've always in fiction, I love my, one of my favorite Star Wars characters is Yoda. Small, underestimated, maligned. Oh, you're just this little, you see what a warrior he is in episode 2. I love Yoda, the philosophy. And for some reason, there are forces among us that are trying to divide this country, divide even in nerd culture, that person's problematic, right? Even there, why are we being so divisive? There's a very famous story that actually was originally in the 1930s. It was a comic strip. Then it became a serial. And it's about an authoritarian leader who kept the kingdoms of Mongo fighting amongst each other to distract them from who the real enemy was, which was Ming the Merciless. That story of Flash Gordon is about keeping people divided based on their differences. If you go back and you read the original comics, which were done in the 30s during the rise of you-know-what in the 30s. Okay.
The Yahtzees.
The Yahtzees, as they're sometimes referred to. And
hello.
Hey,
Okay.
sorry about that.
He's back. No, that's fine.
Look at this. I was on my high horse saying such smart things, and you lost me. We were wrapping up the interview anyways, but anyways, I'm sorry. Yeah, my computer died. Look at that.
It's
you
fine.
killed my computer.
Okay, so this is my last question for you before we can finish up. Okay, so I agree. This is why I love your work generally still, and this is why I love the documentary, because we're of like minds. We're like, being a nerd is a wonderful thing. That means you should be able to be friends with everyone. Okay. It doesn't, all that stuff, it doesn't matter. Okay. Maybe it comes up, maybe it doesn't. We don't really care. It's D&D night. We're just, that's what we're into. I feel like right now it feels like because nerd culture, even more traditional nerds, or people who are, more right wing, they're beginning to feel like they're gaining traction. Like we're seeing the Lucasfilm Star Wars project start to fail, or people are tuning out from the MCU, and so they're saying like, "Oh, now that we're winning, we have to dig in." Their version of nerdery is not to try to bring us back to we're all buddies, but just kind of like the mirror version of what had been done. And I do see this even with my friend circle. I work on a project with one person who's a YouTuber, and then I say, oh, I go to this other person who is also a new YouTuber. They both cover nerd stuff. I say, oh, I can't touch that with a 50-foot pole. Oh, that person. It's like to anyone outside, they're like, the amount of difference between these two people is very small. But for whatever reason, I do see these divisions happening. And I would like to know, like, what can we do to help bring nerd culture, just back to that place where it was? And how can we try to help people who are interested in reviving that, not to get so divided again? How can we try not to fall for the pitfalls that the wokies, or whatever term you want to use, who are in control, have made?
Well, look, I think, first of all, one, talk to those people. Regardless, look, if I stopped being friends with every friend of mine who said something stupid, or a joke I didn't like, or an opinion I didn't agree with, I would have no friends, and my opinions tend to be nuanced because I've lived a little life, right? I've had kids. I've raised 2 kids, and it was not easy in Los Angeles to do that. Because I wanted to protect them from a lot of things that were, I didn't agree with. But the point is that I'm not going to stop being friends with someone just because they have opinion or 2 or 10 that I disagree with. There is a line, right? But you got to get really far with me. You got to tell a lot of bad jokes. But I think you have to engage with people you disagree with, period. And to the best of your ability, especially if you work in the entertainment space, be apolitical. Because when we see like major corporations, it's happening with like Disney and this, and it's like, this, I've never seen this in my life. We need to talk to each other. We need to stop it. It's not going to make things better if we stop talking to each other. If we go down this route of vilifying certain types of people, we have seen what happens when that happens. We have seen that before. This is a rerun. What's happening? And it's going towards a bad place. Attack of the Dock, it's a small thread in there, but it's by design. It's in there. It's in there on purpose. That this was a time when we were more united. How do we get back to that? You learn by engaging with people you disagree with. Maybe you have your mind changed. Maybe you actually come up with a better argument from where you sit. But I'm not looking to win a debate. I mean, my reason, my mission, if I have a mission statement, is to get you to like, I know you're going to see the latest Marvel movie, so am I. And my intention isn't even to get you to not see it. Go to every Marvel movie. I don't miss them. Having said that, see other movies. See indie movies. See documentaries, like the one that you say, I think you were saying earlier, is one of the best documentaries of the year. Attack of the Dock.
It is it is memorable. And for me personally, just because I have such fond memories, and that I sometimes I just feel like I dream at night, or I just thirst for it. Like I've been in the desert, just those days, like when I could just, I go on the Doctor Who forum and it's like, hey, we like Doctor Who. And it's not like, oh, by the way, you can't like this one storyline or that one character because whatever political reason they come up. I miss those days so much. And so your documentary in that sense really spoke to me. And I think for people who are willing to watch it, and I highly encourage you to, even to rent it, it's like $4 maybe.
Yeah.
It brings you back to that. It makes you understand why this was so valuable. What makes being a nerd, a geek, so different from everything else. I miss that. And that's what you did such a great job of explaining and showing. And so that's kind of why I focus so much on that right here in the interview.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate what you did when you had Frosk on. I thought it was a great conversation. You know, you asked her questions that I think were tough. And I was impressed with her answers. I think maybe part of her problem, this is not a bad thing because I have this problem too. Sometimes you can be too honest. And you're not trying to be diplomatic. You're just honest. That I can 100% tell you that's gotten me in trouble in the past for being too honest about like, well, what do I think about this? And then I just honestly tell you the answer. And I believe when the things that Frost said, she's just being honest. She's just being her. So, I mean, it is what it is. I think with the perspective, it's hard to kind of notice when you're in it. I think with the perspective of time, there's a story to be told about the new G4. I don't know that I'm the person that should tell it. They're better people to tell that story because I wasn't there, because I was there at G4, because I remember nerd culture even before G4 and what it was like. I felt I was the right person to tell that story. So I appreciate that you enjoyed it. And I would encourage you to reach out to people that your friends say are problematic, because I think, you know, a lot of people with different views have something to contribute. And that's the whole point of America, this country. How do we coexist with a bunch of people we disagree with? We need to like get the stick out of all of our asses. Stop acting like these immature politicians, because I do believe that there's a political class that is trying to divide people by race, gender, sexuality. Those are all being pushed to us to be divided. I will not comply. I am not going to hate my fellow American person I live in the world with over a political view I might disagree with or whatever. How did we get to the place? Remember the original Star Trek series? They grew past certain problems. We got a long way to go, but I feel like we've stepped backwards in the last more than a decade. We have taken steps backward, and it's disheartening. And so, look, I made a movie about nerd culture. If there's more to think about, you'll notice it. And if not, you can recognize it. But Peter, I thank you for having me on the show. I can't believe my computer died. Like, I should look into that.
Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. It was an honor. Everyone, please check out his documentary, Attack the Doc. Where can people find you generally if they want to follow you online?
Attackofthedoc.com is where you can just look up Attack of the Doc on social media. You can find the movie. Film Threat is my media outlet. I designed this logo when I was like in high school. And well, we changed the logo since. But go to filmthreat.com, follow Film Threat, and go to the Film Threat YouTube channel. Check out Critics Court, Star Wars on Trial. It's going to be fun. I promise you. Be many opinions represented. It's going to be a very interesting case. My personal social media is that Chris Gore. And so check that out. And, you know, I am a sarcastic asshole. So I'm going to say something you disagree with. Let's just laugh. And there you go. You're doing great work, sir. You need to continue this. The thing that you have that I think is amazing, which is why your interview with Frosk was so good, is you're curious and you're open. And you do a lot to gain trust. So I was very excited when you reached out to me. So thank you very much. Thank you again.
Coming from you, Chris, that means a lot. Thank you. This has been CultureScape, my friends. This is produced with the help of Young Voices and Bain Books Publishing. My editor is Chris Holowicki. Thank you, Chris, for all the hard work you put in. Until next time, my friends, keep geeking out.